So I think we should be recording. Yes, yes, we are. So it's going to be very simple tonight. What we're going to be doing is building and styling a form, as you see here. I don't actually have a design. I just eyed this out whenever I built it. And for now, we're just going to take a screenshot and use it as a reference. It's not a very detailed form, but it's pretty custom, if you will, and it's pretty styled. I think it's pretty nice. So here we go. And it's going to start out pretty simple. We're just going to have the form itself as the container. It's going to be centered, and then we're going to start working on the inputs and everything. So starting from technically scratch, we're in the creating forms activity. We have the starter files. I'm going to copy and paste and rename that to my Git username, or GitHub username, sorry, which is I'm Ironclad. We can go ahead and close that for now. Open this. Go to it in the code editor. Here we are. And how we started out, I've got the main section, which is just centered in the middle, and then not the form itself, but just a container that is centered in the middle, and then a heading. So we're going to replace this heading with the form and then go from there. So at the same time, you can see we started with just a blank style sheet. I'm going to put this over here so you can see it. And let's see. Next step is koala. All right, we're pretty good. So I'm going to now find that. So front end study, activities, creating forms. I'm Ironclad. Here's our styles. I don't care for the source map. I told you guys compress though for a while. If you're ever doing that in like production, go for it. But now that we're just doing this for learning. So if I were to do compressed and look at it in the inspector, you wouldn't be able to really like see what's going on with the styles because it's minified. So if you want to, while you're doing development, you can always just do expanded, and that's going to I think print it out like normal, and you can kind of go through the styles in the inspector and see what's going on. So it's up to you if you want to do that. Do check auto prefix, that's important, and click that, and as long as auto compile is checked, you can minimize. So all we're going to do is start out with a form with a class name of form, and we're going to replace this h1 here. For now, for the action, I'm just going to put a hashtag just because if it does post anywhere or does go anywhere, I just wanted to go to the same page. We're not going to, at least I don't think starting out, we're going to do any posting or anything like that. I just don't know if we're going to get that far. So typically you would have a method on your form, and that's going to be either a get or a post. That's kind of a whole other lesson, but just to say we're going to post to something, we're going to have post here, and then of course we need the class name of form. And then again, we're going to be following BIM naming. So we're going to start out with form. That's our block. And then the block's going to have a bunch of elements inside of it. So I'm actually going to go back real quick. Let's go to the example. I need to change the URL from example to my username. So I'm Ironclad index. So now you can see we have kind of nothing because it's an empty form. I will, however, we do have this image with the hi, take my form. I'll just go ahead and add that as well, so it gives us kind of a visual starting point. So we have an H1 that says, hi, take my form. I don't know if it was capital. No, it wasn't capitalized or anything like that. So hi, take my form. So we know that main as well wants to be centered. So we have the class of form here. Let's go ahead and override or just add some styles to this main container. And we want it to be a margin. Oh, we don't even want it to be a margin, right? We want it to be a display of flex, and then we want to justify the content center. And what that's going to do is put the H1 and the form in the center. And our form, like I said, I'm just eyeballing this out, and I think I did like 500 pixels by 500. I think the height ends up being auto, but I do think the width is 500 pixels. And I actually have to put that property for it to work. So width and then height is going to end up being auto. I know it's going to be like probably like a 20 pixel padding. So we're just going to put 20 pixels for now. And then I know the background is going to be white, but I think it's white by default, so I'm not going to set that. And I know that I'm going to want a box shadow so that we can see it from the background or separate it from the background. So whenever you're doing a background or anything that has a horizontal and a vertical property, it always goes horizontal first and then vertical second. And so that's a good way to remember that. So if you're trying to do box shadows and you want to do like a realistic lighting effect and it's going to be top down, your horizontal is going to be 0, and then your Y is going to be, however much you want it to. But for this one, we're just going to do like 20 pixels. For the next box shadow property is blur. We're just going to go large with it and go 50 pixels and then give it the color of black with an alpha of 3 or 30%, just to be like a little subtle box shadow. So I'm going to go ahead and refresh and see what we have. So you can see it is display flex and it's kind of centered, but I think we need to change this to a flex direction of column. Excuse me. So let's go ahead and test that. Flex direction column, and then I want to say that's gonna do what we want, but now it's still gonna not quite be right because it's not centered anymore as you see it. Whenever you change the flex direction to column, you have to, instead of justifying the content, you would now align the items to center. Once you change the flex direction, align and justify kind of become different or opposites of each other. So now you can see we're centered. There is nothing here in the form, so it's really small. Once we start adding things, it'll get bigger. So let's pull up our reference again. So we have hi, take my form. We're looking pretty good so far. Now what we want to do is start out with our inputs. We're going to start out with just the text inputs. And typically, whenever you're building a form, I'm not sure how many you've built, and if you have built them, you know how you think about it. But whenever you're styling, most of the time, whenever you're styling, the labels and the inputs are going to be together in some way, shape, or form. However the design is, they're going to be relative to each other. And so typically I put those in what I would call a form group. And so I'm kind of trying to talk to you about how we're going to start building this markup. And so inside of our form, we know that we're going to have 2 text fields, and we're going to have them in some kind of form group. So I'm going to use a div here. The reason I'm going to use a div is because it's inside of a form. It doesn't have to be semantic really, because it's inside of a form and it's just a container. And I don't think that there's any semantic container for just labels and inputs for forms. So I think a div is fine here. So we're just going to do a div, and then we're going to call that form group. And so inside of that group, I know we're going to need a label, and then we're just going to create a label for now, just say full name. And then I know we're also going to need an input, and that type is going to be text for the first one, which is full name. So now we need to add classes to continue with the BIM naming methodology. And again, you don't have to add classes here. We're doing this because of the act of, and something I didn't mention last time is specificity. If you always have if you're always selecting things by class names, by a single class name, they'll never be fighting with specificity. And so that's just another thing to do, is even if you can select it by just a label, or let's say it was like a figure with an image, you can select it with just an image, but it's better to just give it a class name anyways. So that's just something to keep in mind. Let me get this out of here. Okay, so class, we have a form group, and this is our form group label. Oh, excuse me, my nose is itching. And then for our input, let's give it a class name as well. That's form group input. I mean, you can name them anything other than label and input if you want to, but I mean, that's just simple and obvious, so we're going to go with that. So we have one form group now created with no styles. Let's refresh and see what happens. So we do have it created. You can kind of see though that there's nothing here, and the reason being is we have attached this to our main style sheet for this the repo, if you will, and we have a reset going on, which pretty much resets the styles for forms to absolutely nothing, with no border, no background, nothing like that. And so it's here, and that's why you don't see it. So if we inspected this, I was going to break this out, but I'm actually going to leave it in. So if we inspected this, you can see the input's there. It's just got 0 styles to it. So if we gave it like a background of black, that's the input right there. And then just for fun, we can just say color of white, and then you can see that that's the input. So that's just resetting or a reset style. So we just have to explicitly add that ourselves. So you can see here, again, I just eyed this out, but I'm pretty sure that I did 40 pixels here. For the text, I think it looks pretty default to me, so I don't really think I touched the text or the font size, sorry. And so if we're going to do 40 pixels here, and then the background, I usually just do an off-white, and my 2 off-whites that I typically stick to are E2, 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 or F2, F2, F2. So I mean, that's kind of simple hexadecimal numbers or strings to remember. But those are two like subtle off-whites, and so I know that we're going to use that. So we're going to go ahead and start styling this input and the form as well. So we have our form. We're going to go inside here and say form group. I don't think, let's see. I know, so we have form groups. I know that we're going to need some spacing here between the next one. So we're going to have a margin bottom, but I'm not going to add that yet until we have all of them in there so we know how they affect each other. But we are going to, however, continue. I don't think we need any other styles, but I'm sorry. We do need styles because it's beside itself. They're in line right now and we don't want that. So for this form group, we need to, I think we could probably do display flex. I'm going to test it here in the inspector first. So we have the full name. Okay, so this is what we want to do. We do want to add display flex to the form group itself. Let's do display flex, and then again we want to do the flex direction of columns so they stack on top of each other instead of in a row. Let's verify that worked. Yep, that worked. So now inside of our group, we have our label. However, I kind of just want us to see the input for now, so we're going to skip the label and do those styles. And like I said, we're going to do a height of 40. I typically put width above height, and we're going to do a width of, I think we're going to do a width of 100% because the padding should keep it from touching the walls of the form. So I believe that should work. And then the border, I think it was 2 pixels that I used. And like I said, E2, E2, E2 is a typical off-white color that I go for. I believe that's what I used. That looks pretty good to me. Yeah, I think that's correct. It looks like I didn't really change much for the text there, for the font size or anything like that, so I'm just going to leave that alone. This looks pretty good to me, except for now, I'm actually going to show you on the example. So you can see here that we have some padding here. It's not right up against the edge. And you can actually, I don't know if you can see it well or not, depending on how big your screen is, but the cursor here is green. And so that's actually a special CSS property that we can set to give it some extra branding and style effect if you want to. So we're going to do that now. So we're going to go back. Actually, let's just go back again, back. All right, so here we go. So we need the padding. You can also, I don't know if you can tell, but the font size is pretty small too. We're going to explicitly set the font size on all the form inputs. So for every input, I know we're going to want a font size. I typically do 16 pixels. That's fine. Let's refresh that. Now we can see that's bigger. I believe that the input has a padding left of probably 10 pixels. Yeah, that's fine for me. I think that's fine. And then the special property that I was talking about, it's actually called caret color because that is technically your caret. And then if we wanted to just make it, I'm not going to make it just green. I think there's actually a green color. So I'm going to actually steal from the example colors. So if you want to steal from the color, that's fine. It's this right here, this hexadecimal. Let's close that and come back in here. So it's 42C784. And if we refresh this now, you can see that the caret is actually green. And so there you go. That's like a nice little extra brandy style effect. There's one other thing that I want to note that we've done here that's pretty cool. That's going to show you how to use some pseudo selectors. You have to, it's kind of specific to the project, but another thing that I'm just going to go to a new tab to show you this so I don't have to keep going back and forth in the actual same browser. So let's go back and go to the example. So you can see here when I actually put in a name that the form input, the border, the border becomes green, which technically means valid. And then the same thing with the email address. There's nothing that's there now, but if I turned it into an email address that's a valid email address, it's going to turn green as well. And to do that, we don't need anything fancy. We can just use built-in pseudo selectors for CSS. So let's go back to our form. And what we're going to do is for these inputs, we're going to say when this input, so you have to do the ampersand, which selects this class. And then the pseudo selector you're going to use is valid, which is given to us directly by CSS. So now we're going to say when this is valid, the border is going to be a 2-pixel solid. And then we're going to use that green. And I forgot my colon here. So let's go ahead and save that and then come back here. Oh, wait. Okay, so I think I want to say that technically, because it's a text field, this is something to watch out for. Since it's a text field, technically it's always valid, so there's nothing that can go wrong. So what we have to do, instead of just having this border here, we have to, let's see. I might not be correct. Let's see. I had this working. We'll see. I might have to resort to the example, but we'll see. I think we have to set this in an invalid pseudo selector as well. I'm not sure if that's what we're going to want. Seems like that's not working. And also, one thing I did forget, I don't know if this is going to be a fix for it or not, but we do want these to be required. We're just going to put the required flag on there. So this is a form of HTML5 validation. You can put required on here. It's very easy to get past if someone was trying to hack you, but it's a very basic form of validation. And what that's going to do, that's actually what we needed. So that was the thing. So we're going to take this back to where it was. So now it's required. So since it's empty, it's not technically valid. And whenever we put in a string, it's valid. So now you can see if I use my name, it's valid. If I refreshed it and there's nothing there, it's not valid. So the required property or attribute is what was required there. Next, we are going to do our email address. So what we're going to do, it's going to be the same exact kind of form group. So we're just going to copy and paste this one. And then we're just going to change the, actually, you know what? I forgot to add this here. So I don't want to just skip this stuff. So typically for a label, we have a for. If you're unfamiliar with the for attribute, that just lets you know what input it's for. And whenever it looks for an input, it resorts to the ID. So what we need to actually do is give these both a name and an ID. This is going to be full name, and this is going to be the same thing as an ID. So whenever you do the for, it looks at the ID, and the name is used in case you post to like some kind of website or whatever. You have to have the name attribute in here for the data to actually be transferred in that post request. So that's something to keep in mind as well. So we're going to put that there, and then for is going to be full name. So that's done. Let's refresh this. Everything should be fine. That's not right. Did I copy the whole form? I accidentally copied the whole form. I didn't mean to do that. There we go. That's better. We just finished these with doing the attributes, the for, name, and ID. So we're just going to come back down here and do the same thing here. Except for this one, instead of full name, is going to be email address. And then for the type, instead of text, we have a specific type for email addresses called email. And then again, we're going to need a name and an ID. So we're going to call this email and an ID of email. It's required. It's just a group input. That's perfectly fine. This is going to be for email. I believe that's all we need. However, you can see also, I think, there we go. Yep. So now you can see that it's doing the same thing with the valid class. You can see, though, we need to add this spacing here. So that's what we're going to work on now. We're going to do that, pull up our reference. So we're going to do that by adding a margin bottom to our form groups, and then we'll see if we run into any problems later. So form group, let's do margin bottom of 20 pixels. I think that's what I used. All right, there we go. So we're just going to use that for now. Pull up this reference. I think everything's good so far. So we test that. I think everything's good. So now we need to build this little, we're going to call it a field set. There are actual form elements to help us build this very easily. We're going to start that with another form group. However, instead of calling this form group, since it's a specific kind of element, we're going to give it a different kind of designation, class name, if you will. So instead of form group, it's going to be called form field set. I'm sorry, and it's not even supposed to be a div because there's actually an element for it. So instead of a div, we're actually going to use the field set element. And so what that does, since we have the reset SCSS, I don't think we're going to see anything, but I'll have to add an outline to it before we see it. So let's go ahead and add some styles to that. And I also need to style the label. Actually, I don't think we really need any styles for the label, so I'm going to remove that for now. And now we're going to go into the field set block. So for the field set, we're going to give it an outline of 2 pixels solid green, the same thing as the form inputs above, or the text inputs. Let's go ahead and go back to our browser. So it's 0 height, so that's why it kind of looks like a straight line right now. So we're going to do the width of 100 just to make sure it's 100%. And then height, we're just going to go ahead and do, we're going to do an auto height, and then we're going to do a padding. So let's add a padding of 10 pixels for now. Let's see what we get. So there we go. So that gives us this kind of little thing here. Now, what you might be thinking for this little paragraph, you might think you have to style that and get fancy with it. You really don't, because forms actually help us with this. They give us another default element called a legend, which is specific to a field set, which pretty much, I mean, I added some fluff to this, but that's pretty much what it gives us. So what we're going to do is, instead of doing a paragraph or anything that you would have normally used, we're going to use a legend, and we're going to say, what did I call it, or what did I say? What's your skill set? So we're going to leave that like that and give it a class name. This is the form field set legend. So there you go. That's actually it's actually not what I expected. I did expect it to kind of be up like this. I'm not sure if I changed anything with that or not in the example. I'll have to check it out. I'm actually going to resort to that because I feel like that was by default, and if I change something, I don't want it to be. So let's see, example, styles, field set, padding, legend. Yeah, I didn't change anything. Let's see, outline. Oh, maybe it's because it's a border. Maybe that's why. Okay, so yes, that's my fault. Good thing I resorted to the example. So outline is a property that you can use, but border is what I meant to use. And so field set comes typically with a border that we reset with the style. So now if we refresh it, you can see that it actually is like that by default. The outline is outside of the entire field set. What I meant to do was the border of the field set. So most of that's good. You can see that in the image, though, there's a little more spacing there. So I did fluff that up. So in the legend, so field set legend, I just gave it an extra padding right and left of 5 pixels. So pad right and left, and there we go. So we got a little extra padding there, and I think that's good. So as you can see, we didn't do any fancy styles. I want to say, what is this, like 6 lines of CSS, and then we've got this fancy little thing, and then you just got to add stuff in the middle. And what a field set is, so if you're interested in looking at the field set and what it is, you can come here to the front of the repository and go to the list of all HTML elements. Come down here, you can do a Control or Command F and search for field set. So the field set element is used to group several controls as well as labels within a web form. So controls, meaning checkboxes or radio buttons, which are what we're using for these particular inputs. So field set's what we're going to use, and if you go into the field set, you'll see here that the field set actually has a legend, which is what gives us this thing up here. And so that's kind of how you know to use that, and that's kind of how I figured out to use that, to be honest with you. It's like whenever I was building this to show you guys, I resorted to this list, and I was like, okay, what all can I possibly use to, you know, group the, can I use something that's not a div to group these labels and inputs? But I didn't really find anything that I thought mattered. So that is a field set, and it gives us most of that stuff right off the bat. Oh, sorry, I don't need to be in the example. I need to be in mine. There we go. With my phone on Do Not Disturb too. There we go. Alrighty, so what we're going to do now is these are going to be checkboxes, and they're going to be grouped as well, but they're not going to be, I think we're going to call it a checkbox group to be a little more specific. So we know that we're going to take, we know we're going to want a form group, so I'm going to copy the base of the form group. We're going to be changing the name, the class names and such, and everything inside of it. Fix that spacing, get rid of this extra spacing here. So it's form group. We're actually going to call this, so it's not in the actual form group anymore, as you can see as well. It is in the form field set. So we're going to say form. Also, you can see these styles down here have a group on them. We're going to change them as well in one swoop. So form field set group. Yes, we're going to do, yes, form field set group, because it's a group inside the field set. So now we have the form field set group label and the form field set group input. However, we need to change these because it's not going to be an email address. This is going to be HTML. It's going to be for HTML. Actually, we're going to call these. So whenever I looked at this, we have what's your skill set. And so typically what I want to do is give these some kind of defining name so we'll know what that is whenever the data hits wherever it's going. So I'm going to call these skill HTML, skill CSS, skill JavaScript. So this is going to be skill underscore HTML. And same thing here. So this is going to be a type, which is actually going to be a checkbox as the type here instead of a text or anything like that. The name, again, is going to be skill HTML, and the ID as well is going to be skill HTML. Form field set group input, that's fine. It's not required, however. Let's see, not required. No, it is not required. So I want to say, so if this entire, like if one of these in the form was required, I'm not sure if there's an HTML attribute that you would do for that. You would actually have to just do some JavaScript validation to say if any of these or if all of these are unchecked, then give some kind of message. I'm not sure if you can do like this. I'm not sure if you can put an attribute on all three of them to look at the same thing. So you can with radio buttons, but not these, not with checkboxes, if I'm not mistaken. Feel free to prove me wrong. So that's one of them. Let's look and see what we have so far. Refresh. Did I change to mine? I'm ironclad. Yes, I did. Did I save this? I got to save the HTML file first. Skill, we have this. Yep, okay, save it. There we go. So we have our label and our checkbox. However, we have the default checkbox for now. And this is what we're going for. So I'm thinking, we can also see before we do that, you can see there's a little more space here in the field set, if you will. Let's go ahead and put that in there. So we're going to adjust the padding for the field set. I want to say I'm going to comment this out just to show you that by default, there's a little more spacing on the top than the bottom anyways. So I don't think we need to give it any space, or I don't think we need to give it as much spacing on the top as the bottom. So for that reason, we're going to do 10 pixels, 20 pixels, 20 pixels for our padding. What that does is it sets the top to 10 pixels, the left and the right to 20 pixels, and then the bottom to 20 pixels. And that's a shorthand property to set 4 of them in that specific way. So now we're going to check it out. I feel like there's a little more space, so we're going to step it up a little bit. So we're going to say, actually, we're going to go to 12 and then 25, 25. 25 seems too much on the bottom. Yeah, we'll do 20. We'll go back to 20. All right, we're going to leave it like that for now. I think that's good. That might actually be it anyways. So now what we're going to do is work on these custom checkboxes. So you can see by default, this is what it gives you. It's not very great. Let's work on customizing it. One thing to start off with, whenever you do start customizing these, you're typically going to reset the default appearances before adding custom styles. And so to do that on the checkbox, to do that on the checkbox, let's go into the field set. We have the field set legend, and then we have a field set group. And then inside that group block, we have a label, and then adjacent to that label, we have the input. So this is going to be our checkbox. Sorry, my cats are crazy. So this is our checkbox, and I believe it is anyway. So what we got to do to change that or reset that default appearance is do WebKit appearance none. Actually, if you have auto prefixer checked on Koala, you don't need to do the WebKit portion. So we need to do WebKit, not WebKit, sorry, appearance none. And if you have auto prefix, Koala should take care of that for you. So there you go. You can see that just appearance none gets rid of what you see. So now we have to kind of completely remake this from scratch. So we know for a fact that we're going to start off with probably like a 30 pixel by 30 pixel square. So let's start off doing that. So for input, we have appearance none. We also have a width and height of 30 pixels. We know that the background color, whenever it's inactive, is going to be this light gray, which is the same thing as this form, which is E2. Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to do E3. E2. And again, if you guys want to, I encourage you whenever you're going through this. I did not create variables because I didn't have a design to start off with. If you want to, you can go ahead and take what's in the example and kind of take variables out of it and then build your own thing off of that if you want variables, but I didn't set them. So let's see if we can refresh this. So we have now a box. I think that's a tad bit too big, so let's go ahead and make it a little smaller, maybe 25, 25. I think that's more accurate. That's good. Now we can see the alignment here is a little off. So what I'm going to do before going back and forth between the editor and everything, thing to kind of practice and get better at is to go in the inspector and play around with the styles before switching back and forth between the editor. If you have to switch back and forth, you might have multiple screens in a setup where it's not required. So what we're going to do for this group is turn it into a display of flex. Very simple. So most of everything we've got is taken care of. Now we want everything to be kind of centered. So of course that is align items center. Now you can see that it's more evenly spaced or vertically. However, we want a little bit of space between the label and the input. So what we're going to do here is for the label, we're going to do probably just a margin right of maybe 5 pixels. And so now you can see we got a little more space. So we have a margin right of 5 pixels and flex and align items center. So that's pretty simple. So for the group, display flex, align items center. Halfway there. Now for the label itself, we're going to have to do a margin right of 5 pixels. There we go. I think that's what we want. So now what we need to do, we see that there's an outline here. For, let's see, I think for technically every kind of input or button or anything like that you can interact with on the website has a default outline property. And what that outline property is for for accessibility, is to let the user know where they are, like what they're selecting on the page or what's focused on the page at the current time. A lot of people choose to omit or leave that out, which, I mean, it can be fine. I mean, it's whatever. If you don't want to be accessible, it's okay if you're choosing to do that. However, a good thing that I'm trying to get in the habit of doing is, instead of removing that outline or doing something custom with it, like a border or anything like that, I'm trying to utilize that property that's given to me in a different way. So what we're going to use here, instead of doing a border or something like that, or a box shadow, we could do a box shadow here too. We're actually going to use the outline property that comes with it and just change it. So you can see here, if we actually let's see if I can show you this. I think I can. So here we have an input. It's not focused. I want to kind of give it a focus to show you that it's giving it an outline, but it's not showing it here in the styles. So I'm not sure. Let's see if we can filter this. I'm going to check this out because I want to visually show you what's going on. Outline. So if we focus this, here we go. So if we focus it, you can see we get some outline properties. WebKit, focus ring, 5 pixels, yada, yada, yada. So pretty much all you need to know is that this is a default outline that's given to us by Google Chrome. And so we need to adjust that. So if I wanted to change that, we could take this, take the focus off, take the hover, clear the filter. Let's go into the styles and say, for the input, do the ampersand to collect the styles where we are so far. And then what we're going to change, there's 2 things that you probably want to think about when doing this. There's a default focus pseudo selector or focus state for inputs and stuff like that in forms that we can do. So focus is one, and then the other is if you want to kind of do a hover effect, you can. That's up to you. We're going to for now. So you can do, sometimes it's not desirable on the same thing as a focus, but we're going to for this one. So we're going to do a hover as well. So on our focus and our hover, let's see, the outline of this is going to be, let's see, it's going to be a 1 pixel outline, and it's going to be that solid green. And then let's go ahead and see what we get now. So now you can see that we get that green. However, you can see that it's kind of spaced out or offset, if you will. And so there's another property that's given to us, outline offset, that'll easily let that happen for us. Let's go back to our editor. We're also going to give it an outline offset of 3 pixels. And again, I just kind of eye this out just to see that we have it. So there you go. You can see I hover it, And then you can kind of tell when I'm focused on it. So if I click it, it's got focus right now. And if I click off of it, if I click somewhere else on the window, it loses that focus. Click on it again, it's got focus. Click off of it, now this has focus and that lost focus. So if you want to have the effect on hover, you can. That's up to you. And then, whatever. So now what we need to do, we know that whenever we hover it or whenever it's focused, whenever something is checked, that we want to have it background color green. So checkboxes have a pseudo selector for checked. So we're going to go into the same input block and do checked. When that happens, our background color is going to be changed to the green. Let's verify that works. All right, that indeed works. All right, but you can see it's kind of, let's see, you can see here in the example, it's a little more subtle. So what we're going to do is kind of add that transition to it, which is very simple. So go to the code, and what we're going to go is we're going to go on the input. What we're going to do is add a transition property, and what we're going to transition, you can actually just add background color. It's not like the best thing to transition, but it works, so it's fine. Then we're just going to use ease and just do 0.3 seconds, which is equivalent to 300 milliseconds, or pretty quick. So now, if we do it, you can see that the background just fades in instead of instead of instantly shifting between the two. So our last step here is to do the check mark. I don't think there's any default property or anything to give it a check mark. So I created these using pseudo elements. So we're going to do the same thing here. So those pseudo elements are going to be on the input. So we know for a fact that they're going to be positioned absolute. So for our input, we want it to be a position of relative, so that they're positioned according to that, or relative to that, if you will. So we're going to have two pseudo selectors, or two pseudo elements, sorry. We're going to have a before and an after, and I know that I'm going to want some of the same styles on both of them. So for now, I know both of them, I'm going to want content of nothing. Let's see. They aren't going to be the same width. I'm sorry. They actually are going to be the same width. They're going to be 2 pixels for now. The height is what's going to be different, which is going to be kind of like the length, but the width is going to be the same. I know the background color is going to be the same, which let's make sure I think it's white. Yeah, okay, so it's going to be white. What else? I think that's all that's uniform for now. Actually, I think position absolute itself will be something that's uniform between both of them as well. So we have our content, and let's go ahead and do position absolute, which will be shared between both of them. Now that we've got the uniform styles, we can go ahead and create the individual styles that are specific to each particular one. So our before, this is where we're going to set our height, which is going to be different. Yep. See you later, DT man. I'll post in the Charlotte Devs channel whenever this is on YouTube, so feel free to check it out. Have a good night, man. So this is where we're going to set our height, which is, pretty much the two variations. The before element is going to be our shorter piece, and then the after is going to be the longer piece. That's just a choice. You can do whatever you'd like. But for the before, we're going to do, and this is, again, I just eyed this out. I think this is kind of like, let's just say 7 pixels. Might even be, I'm just going to do 5 pixels to start out with. Excuse me. And then I just want to get a visual on what we have so far. So I'm also going to go to the after, and then this is going to be like twice as long, and it's going to be like a height of 10. Let's go ahead and refresh and see what we get. So something's obviously not quite right. Oh, actually, I know what's going on. So they're both in the top left there, so it kind of looks like it's not a full cube, but it is. So now we just need to position them. And again, this is something where I kind of played around with it. So this is something that's good to do in the inspector before doing in the code editor. So you go back and forth. You can just select this element here in the inspector, and we know that it's got position absolute already, as you can see here in the bottom. So all we want to do is adjust the top and left values. So for our top, we can do 5 pixels, and then for our left, let's do 10 pixels. Let's just see what that gives us. So there we can see our little tiny block. I'm about to move it here. You can see it. 5 pixels is actually too small. So we're going to go up to 8 pixels. Looks pretty good. The top needs to be, it's actually pretty good for the top. Then we're going to make it come a little bit farther left. And now you can see it's actually slanted as well. So we're going to do a transform rotation. However, we're going to wait until we use this the other hand or the other part of the check mark to base our rotation off of that one. We have, as you can see, a height of 8 pixels, a top and a left of 8 pixels. If you want to, you can now copy that directly from the inspector so you don't lose it, and then put that on the before pseudo element. Let's fix that spacing. Not quite right. There we go. All right, so if we refreshed it, we should get exactly what we see there, except for the green. So there you go. Now for the after, we can do the same thing by kind of just selecting it and then playing around with it. So we know it's a position absolute already. So we do a top. Let's start off with 2 pixels just to see. The height is 10 pixels. It obviously needs to be longer, so we're going to go to 18. And then again, we're going to need a left property, and we're going to say 10 pixels for now. We'll go with 15 pixels. So this is how we're going to start off. Now we have to kind of get the rotations correct. So we're going to just play around with this again. So we're going to start off, and what we're going to use is a transform. I think my voice is cracked. Excuse me. So we're going to use a transform. We're going to use a rotate, and then we're just going to play around with the degrees. So we're going to start off with 15 degrees. So you can kind of see that happening over here, how that's taking place. And now all we have to do, a trick if you don't know this, you can kind of put your cursor here in the inspector and just use your mouse arrows to increment or decrement this by 1 or more. So what I'm just going to do is, you can see I'm just kind of changing it around. I kind of like where it is right here. Actually, we're gonna go with this. We're gonna go with 32. So the rotate's 32. Now that we see the rotation, I kind of want to change the top a little more now. Top 3, that looks good. I think the right is good as well. So I'm gonna go ahead and copy and paste these styles to put on our after element, just so we don't lose them. Fix this spacing again. There we go. Let's refresh, make sure that's good. There we go. Excuse me. Then the last thing to do is to base our before pseudo element, base its transforms off of that one. So we know we're going to do a transform rotate. We don't know how many degrees yet, so let's go ahead and start playing around with it. You can see that it's actually going the wrong way, so we need to go in negative degrees, which is no problem. So this looks like it might start lining up correctly. Now we need to change the top and the left so it lines up correctly. The left, this looks like it might be okay. Let's see if I can scroll in to see what's happening. Or zoom in, sorry, not scroll in. So you can see that it's, I don't know if you can see this or not, it's not quite right. There's a little tiny gap between them. And we're using pseudo elements, and like I said, I'm zoomed in to, this is 250%. So if you don't really care about that too much, I mean, that looks like a good check mark to me. So if it looks good to you, then that's fine. But we can also try to fine tune it a little more. I think that points like 13.1 pixels is technically valid. Yeah, so you can do point values. So if I wanted to, let's see, I can go to the left property. We can go 7.3 pixels. So let's just do that. Let's just do top 13 and let's just copy paste so we don't have to worry about it. Copy and paste this to the before element. Fix the spacing or indentation, sorry. Give that a refresh and reset the zoom. And that looks pretty good to me. I mean, it's probably not the exact same as this here, but don't worry about that too much, as long as it looks like a good check mark. So that is, that's pretty much our form group. Now there's one thing left to do. You can see that it's still visible here. We don't want that to happen. So what we're gonna have to do is change them to a 0 opacity to start, and then make them appear as this turns green. So let me, well, I don't wanna see that. Actually, it looks kind of off there. That's all right. We're just gonna leave it. So what we're gonna do is go into, I said so again, there we go. So by default, our before and after pseudo elements, they are gonna have the uniform opacity of 0. And then whenever the input is checked, they are going to have an opacity of 1. So a trick here is, so we have our input and we already have a checked pseudo selector, which means when this input is checked. And so for our before and after pseudo elements, we're going to change this opacity when this input is checked. So what we can do is how we would do that normally is we would say input with the pseudo selector of checked, and then do a pseudo selector right behind it of after. So what I mean is we would be checked after. So this is what we're going to do. And what this gives us, as I hover over it, you can kind of see, you can see that it gives us form, field set, group input, checked, and after. So it's kind of like a combo pseudo selector, which is the same thing. Let me type the style out. So we have input, checked, after. So it's the same thing as doing that right there. But you can nest it with, SCSS, so it makes it a little cleaner. So now, whenever it's checked, we want our before and our after to have an opacity of 1. Let's go ahead and see, so we can see that that worked. Excuse me. It's not here, and whenever we click this, it is there. If you want to, technically this looks fine because the animation for the background is so quick, but if you wanted to also do a transition on this opacity, you can do that as well. So for the before and after pseudo elements, you would do a transition of the opacity, and again you can just do ease or whatever you want to, and then 0.3 seconds, which is the same as this animation here for the input. So now if we go back, we have exactly what we want, which is what we have here. So the next job to do to finish this entire thing off is to add the CSS and JavaScript, and then we want to verify that it's responsive, at least somewhat responsive. So next thing to do, there I said so again. It's an epidemic, I'm telling you. So let's grab this checkbox form group or field set group, if you will. Let's go ahead and paste it twice more. We know we're going to have a skill CSS. Change this to CSS. Checkbox, skill C. Okay, that's good. And this HTML is going to be JavaScript. Let's make this a capital J. Let's refresh and see what we have. All right, so here's our next challenge. Sorry, this is something we're going to run into as well, is just getting them straightened out. I want to say I might have had, whenever I initially built this, I might have had an issue with Flexbox. So I might have had to use floats, which isn't a big deal, but we'll see what happens. It might have been with the radio buttons that I had an issue. So we have an issue here. Our field set itself, like the groups within them, need to be aligned. And so we can do that by making our field set a display of flex and then changing the flex direction to column, or changing the, I think it should align them by itself. So let's go ahead and do that. We have our field set. We're going to do display of flex. Let's go ahead and just refresh it and see what that gives us. Okay, so it doesn't give us what we're expecting. So I'm going to go ahead and go into the inspector and see what happens. So this is our field set right here. We have our legend and the for. Okay, so I'm thinking it might be, I don't know, it might just be because there's a legend. I can't exactly explain it, but it's not working for some reason. These divs are taking 100% width, and I'm not setting that anywhere. I think it's just because they're a block or just how field set treats it. And so an easier way to do this, instead of using flex, is to simply use a float left on each of these form groups. So let's try this. They can remain a display of flex with their align center, or with their align items of center, but we're also going to add, I typically just add floats right at the top. So let's say float left, and let's see what happens. All right, so that was very simple. So whenever they float left, they're right here with each other. But now you can see they're really bunched up behind, or bunched up on top of each other. So we want to add some spacing or margin between them. So how we want to do this, you might think to add a margin right on these, but if we did that, if we had this JavaScript here, it's going to have a margin right when we don't really need that margin right. So another thing we can do is utilize another pseudo selector to give everything except for this first one a margin of left, which means they'll all have a margin of left except for this one. So it's not, let's see, if this one had, if this had a margin left, it wouldn't be where it is now. It'd be obviously offset a little bit. And we don't want that, so we want to do everything except for that one. And how we do that is go in here to the groups, and we would say do the ampersand and do a pseudo selector of not is the pseudo selector we're going to do. And then we're going to add another, you can add another pseudo selector inside of these parentheses. And this is just CSS. This is not SCSS. So if you're interested in looking into that, it's not SCSS. So don't get confused with that. So now we're going to say not first of type, which means not first of the field set groups. We want to add a margin left of, let's just say 10 pixels for now. We'll see what happens. All right, so that added some spacing, but I don't think it's quite enough. We're going to increase it by a little more. Let's just go ahead and say 20 and see if that's a little more reasonable. That's fine. I think that's, if it's anything, it might be a tiny bit more than what we have in the picture, but that's not a big deal. So this works, as you can see. They all have a margin left, actually, instead of a right, except for this one. You may run into issues. I will say you may run into issues where, so as you can see, our form's not responsive. We got to make it responsive. You might run into issues where if these stack down on top of each other, I'm trying to think. I had a brain fart actually thinking about responsiveness. Okay, you might run into an issue where, let's say JavaScript has a margin left now. If it ends up on the next line, it might be offset like HTML would be if it had a margin. So you might consider doing margin right, and you can do a similar thing with this. So instead of saying not the first one, you could say not the last one and do a margin right. And so they'd all have a margin right except for the JavaScript one. So if you run into those issues, just think of it in a reverse way, and you can still accomplish the same thing, just a little backwards. But for now, we're going to stick with how we have it. And if we do run into that issue, we'll fix it. But as I said, our form is not responsive in the first place. Let's go ahead and add the styles to accomplish that. So up here at the very top, we have our form with a width of 500. I want to give this a max width of 90%, sorry. And then since it's going to be in the center at one point, I'm just going to go ahead and add a margin right and left of auto. All right, there we go. So now it is responsive. Well, mostly. The form itself is responsive. The text inputs, they're pretty simple, so I'm not going to worry too much about them. However, as you can see, this needs to be responsive now. So this is an interesting behavior to notice with a legend. It actually keeps that width, and so you probably have to set an explicit width if you want to for that. But as you can see, this is the issue I was talking about here. But it's actually, I'm kind of glad I did that first, because now I can kind of show you the issue you might run into. So if I did a not first margin left on all of these, whenever these fall down to the next line, they're going to be offset with that margin. So what might be a better thing for me to do, as I mentioned, is to approach this from a reverse way and say everything except for this last one should have a marginal left. So let's go ahead and try that backwards and see what result we get. So now we're going to change this pseudo selector. Where were we? Right here in the group. So not first of type, we're going to change first of type to last of type. And then instead of left, we're going to do right. So that's all you have to do to change it into the opposite way. So refresh it, and now you can kind of see that they're all the same, but they do have that margin to the right, which this might be a more desirable effect. And if that's what you want, that's cool, go for it. Just be weary. So now if you were doing this, but if, let's say they were float right, let's just say that for 1 second. Let's say they were float right for demonstration purposes. So now let's say they're floating to the right, and you don't want them to be, so now the first ones are offset. If you don't want that to happen, you'd have to do it backwards and then do everything on the margin left. So it depends on how you have it working. Just keep that in mind. If it's not working one way, you can do it a little bit backwards and accomplish it the same. Let's refresh and see what we have though for ourselves. So now it's better, but it's not perfect. So whenever it stacks, let's see. Whenever it stacks, we got to find a way to kind of space these things out. And I want to say we could add a padding bottom to these at a certain point. I'm not sure the best way to do it, because again, same thing with margin right and margin left. If we added padding bottom to these, then it's going to add spacing to the overall container and some extra spacing down here because JavaScript would have it too. So let's go ahead and add the style actually just so we can see it. We're going to add it in the inspector though, just so we can refresh it and lose it. So let's say they had padding bottom of 5 pixels. Let me check that out. Let's actually increase it so we can make it a little more drastic and noticeable. So here we can see that, but now it also adds some extra padding down here that you can see that green. It might not be very noticeable. You might miss it, but it is adding some extra spacing that you might not want on that component. So just be careful of that as well. But you could also do a not last of type padding bottom, but you got to be careful because sometimes you might be here and you won't. Just be careful with it because you can run into issues where you might have to do it backwards. But so what we want to do, we have padding bottom 10 pixels. Let's go ahead and add it because it looks okay, but I'm going to do a not last of type, like I said. Excuse me. So we have not last of type. So technically this might be the same selector. Let's see, not last of type. All right, so I think it's the same selector. So let's go ahead and add a padding bottom of 10 pixels. Let's refresh it. I think we should get the same thing. Okay, so that is the same thing. Let's see. Okay, and since it's not last of type, now we don't have anything on the bottom, or for JavaScript, sorry, because it's the last, so there's nothing extra added here. If it was, then you would see some extra spacing. However, I'm not sure. This might work how we want it for now. This might be the effect we want. This is where we might get a little offset. So now it's responsive and it looks good here, but now whenever we're on desktop, you can see there's extra spacing on the bottom because the first two that aren't the last one, now have that spacing. So to fix that is we'd probably just want to put this in a media query. So I'd call this a content breakpoint. You have your typical device breakpoints, but if you have something that's more content specific, feel free to create a custom breakpoint. So I know right now using this form, I would test it, and I know that at 400, and you can see here in the top corner, I'm looking in Google Chrome, at 495 pixels, it's going to break. And so I know at 494 pixels, I want those to have a padding of bottom. So let's go ahead and take this and cut it out and remove it. And in this same not last of type selector, we're going to do a media query. So we're going to say media only screen and max width. I think it was 495 pixels, I believe. And then we're going to paste in that padding bottom. So let's go ahead and refresh and verify that's what we want. All right, perfect. So we're at above 495. There's no extra added. But as soon as we hit below 495 and it breaks, then you can see that it adds that padding to the bottom. There we go. You can see that padding, the green stuff on the bottom there. And if you want to be very, very sure, you can go like very slowly in the inspector here and do it pixel by pixel, because you might be going a little too quick and do a media query for like 2 or 3 pixels too high. And then someone else could be looking at the site and happen to fall in that 3 pixels that you missed and then have some kind of bug, if you will. So just be careful with that as well, and be very specific with, or very careful with the width of the inspector. Sorry. So I'd say that's pretty responsive. It's not perfect. This is kind of odd, the legend. I don't know why it's keeping that width. I'm not going to worry about it too much. I'm just going to keep moving on so we can build this radio set next. I'd say that's pretty good. So now we have a working checkbox. Alrighty. I'm going to close the inspector for now. So now what we have this. Let's go ahead and make the next field set. It's going to be another field set, but it's going to be with radio buttons instead. So all we're going to do is copy and paste this field set. And then we're going to cut out everything except for one form group, because we're going to start with one. And then, okay, so here we're going to have to, we're going to notice that our checkboxes and our radio buttons, they're going to need different styling. However, the class names at the current time, like right now, they are the same because we just copied and pasted. So we might need to get a little more specific with our naming. And so for this particular field set, I know that it's checkboxes. And so what we're going to do is we're going to make this a little bit more specific to checkboxes. We have to change that in both our markup and our styles. So what I mean, let me go ahead and close some of this stuff so you can see what I'm focusing on. Let's see. Oh, didn't mean to do that. Didn't mean to do that, sorry. Close that, close that. Form field set. All right. So this is a form field set group. group label. Let's see, the labels I think are going to have the same styles, but the inputs themselves are different. So we don't have to worry about the label. We're going to keep that name the same, but for our inputs, we're going to get a little more specific, and we're going to say, we're going to select all of these, which is the 3 groups that we have. We're going to say instead of just input, this is going to be checkbox input. And similarly, how we just did that for our checkboxes, we're going to go into this next field set, and instead of just having group input, we're going to have group radio input. And then that way, we can have these styles specific to the checkboxes, and then these styles specific to the radio buttons, while still having a nice BIM methodology going on. So if we refreshed it without changing the styles, we should lose all of our stuff. That's that makes sense. And now what we want to do is change in here. We have a group and input. So this input now should be checkbox input. Sorry, there we go. So make sure that's the same thing. Should be. Refresh that, and looks like it's good to go. All right, so that's good to go. And now, since we know we have a checkbox for input, we know we're going to have another block for for radio input. I'm not sure if they share any styles or not, but be careful for that. So like identify in this checkbox input, if you know anything is going to be the same as the radio input, instead of putting that code in 2 spots, you can just do a comma selector and do both of them. Excuse me. So for instance, I know both of them at least are going to be a position of relative. So I can add position of relative here and remove that from here, and now I don't have to worry about it here because I've added it here for both of them. The next thing, I think that they are 25 pixels by 25 pixels as well. So we're actually going to cut this and put this for both of them as well. I think I accidentally cut the wrong thing. There we go, cut, paste, there we go. All right, so now they have the same exact height as well. Let's go ahead and refresh. So now you can see this one got just as big as 25 by 25. Transition background color, that's going to be the same. I want the same transition for them both, at least regarding the background color. The appearance, none. We also need to change this. I noticed it now. It's a checkbox still. Let's go ahead and change that to radio. I'm not sure if we need appearance none. We don't need appearance none because there's nothing actually here. So that's not necessary on both of them. So we're going to leave it for the checkbox. And then to start off with, the background color is going to be uniform for both of them. And then for them being checked, the background color is going to become green. So as you can see, that's what we have here. We can actually remove that style from here to keep it dry. Because now on both of them, whenever they have the same background color, and then whenever either one's checked, it's going to become green now. So let's go ahead and refresh and see what we get. So there you go. You can kind of see that it's turning green now. A small detail, as you can see that my cursor is not changing to a pointer or anything like that. And I like to make it explicit on inputs and buttons and things that it's some kind of input or button. So for all of our inputs and everything, we're going to add a cursor pointer. So we have form, group, input. We don't need it on the text inputs just because that does the text cursor, as you see. We do need it for all of the checkboxes and radio buttons. So let's go to our field set group and then go to our checkbox input. And here we want to, let's see. Yes, this is where I was going to do. So appearance now, let's do cursor pointer. Actually, I'm sorry. We should put that in both of them because we want it in both of them. So that was duh moment for me. So save that, and that should take care of all of these. So now you can see that it changes to a pointer, which just lets you know that that's something you're supposed to like click on or interact with. It just lets you know that that's something you're supposed to click on or interact with. Let's go ahead and add the remaining radio buttons and change the labels to the numbers, as you can see here, 1 through 5. So we're going to change this to 1. Also, I need to change the for and the skill and the name and the ID as well. So instead, what we're going to do, when it comes to checkboxes, we had skill HTML, skill CSS, and skill JavaScript, because checkboxes, you might in some cases have multiple checkboxes, which you would still capture those with their own individual names because they're different things. Typically with a radio group, you're only going to select one of those because they're supposed to be options. And so, for instance, 1 through 5, instead of doing radio 1, radio 2, radio 3, we're actually going to give it the same thing, which is called form rating. And every single one of our inputs are going to have that same for attribute or whatever. And that's so whenever we click one, it knows that. So if this form rating is checked, the other radio button that's also the same name can't be checked as well. So it kind of takes that, it makes it where they can't be checked at the same time. Checked is the pseudo term that I'm using, but technically it's a radio button. So we changed our label, and now what I want to do is copy and paste it 4 times so that we get to number 5. So this is 2, and it's form rating. Actually, let's undo that. I didn't finish the input yet. So we have a type of radio. This is not skill HTML. This should be form rating. And then this is a radio input. That is correct. So now let's copy and paste it 4 times. We have 2, 3, 4, and 5. And since the form rating is the same across all of them, we don't have to change that. So we refresh it, and this is what we get. And now you can see, I'm going to try to demonstrate this. I think that my thinking on this is correct. I'm going to see what happens if I take the form rating like off of them, or if I do say form rating 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, so that's 5 of them. Can I select multiple now? Okay, so I still can't select multiple. So you might not need them to have the same name, but typically for the radio, you're going to have one checked. So you give them the same name so that whichever one's checked, you know that the value of whatever's passed is going to be the one. So for instance, if I were to, we don't have to specify form rating 5 or form rating 4 or form rating 3, 2, or 1. We can just specify form rating. Since only one of them are checked, whenever that data is sent to the back end, it's all you're going to do is look at the value of form rating, and that value is either going to be 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5, and that's controlled by the inputs themselves. I think that the one last thing I want to do, that's technically all we needed to do according to the picture, but I did mention I wanted to add some kind of similar outline like we did here to the checkboxes. So we're going to work on that. So for the checkbox, for the radio input, here we go. So we don't really need much extra actually. Like it gets a lot from the checkbox input. What we want to do is, instead of doing outline like we did with the checkbox, we're actually going to use a border. Yeah, well, let's see. We're going to do a border. Or we're going to do a box shadow. Oh, okay. So I was going to do a pseudo element is actually what I'm going to do. So we're going to use I think we're going to use an after pseudo element for this. So let's try this out. So in our radio input, let's go ahead and start the block. Our content is going to be empty. Let's see, the position we know is going to be absolute, I think. Yeah, we're going to be an absolute and then be centered. So top, let's just do 0. Oh, that's not how I want that to be. Top 0, left 0. I think we're going to change that to 50% later, but for now we're just going to do that. The width is going to be, let's do 102%, and then the height's going to be 102% as well. It's a circle, so we need the border radius to be 100%. And then background's going to be nothing to start off with. We are going to do a border, and for now we're just going to do a 1 pixel solid red just so we absolutely know where it's at. And since we have position absolute on our pseudo element, we need a position relative on our actual element. So position relative, that works. Let's refresh and just see what we get. Alrighty, so that's what we have so far. It's a red outline, or actually it's another element, if you will. It's positioned off a little bit, so we need to change the top and left. Interesting. So I've never done this before, so this is kind of a new thing for me. So using a pseudo element to make a circle outline anyways. So let's see, we have width, height 100. Let's see what we do if we change the position a little bit. 50%, 50%. Uh-oh, fire station. We're going to translate this. Oops, sorry. Translate. Negative 50%, negative 50%. Okay, so I do want that to happen. So let's copy this. I don't want to type it again. And let's fix this indentation. Save that. And instead of red, we're going to go with the green. And now instead of 102%, we're going to go with 103% to give it a little, well, still not looking quite how I want it to. I want it to be bigger than the circle itself. Width. So instead of doing a percentage, we're gonna try to mimic the outline's offset of 3 pixels by using a CSS calc of 100% plus 3 pixels. And we're gonna see what this gives us. I'm not sure if that's gonna work or not. Not really. That didn't work too well. Not sure why it's so off center like that. It's weird. Transform, width calc, content. Yeah, it's kind of not quite center, as you can see, so I'm not sure how I want to do this. Center. Maybe we could get fancy and just do a box shadow. You know what? I want to continue on. Well, do I want to continue on? Got to make the submit button and everything. So for now, we're not going to worry about this. I want to continue and finish what I know that we can make, and then we'll come back to this at the end. So we have everything set up. So far, we got to create the button, which is not a big deal. You can see here we don't have a space here under these because it's not our normal form group. So we also have to add some margin there. So for our field sets, so in our form field set, let's go ahead and add a margin bottom of 20 pixels. There we go. And that gives both of them a margin bottom. And then last but not least, for the form itself, we need a button. We're going to use an actual button element here. In that button, we're just going to say submit. It's going to have a type of submit. So when you have a form, you can have a button with a type of submit with a type of submit, which lets you know that this button is meant for submitting this form that it's inside of. So let's see, submit. We're also going to add a class name. This is going to be form button submit. And now all we need to do is style it. So we're going to minimize these styles so we can see what's going on really easily. So we have our form group, form field set. Now we have our form button submit. It's going to be a width of 100%. We're going to give it a height of 40 pixels, which is the same thing as our text inputs, if you remember. And then let's see, button submit. We're going to do a background color of green. Let's see what the, I think it's a color of white. Yep, that's correct. So color of white, color white, and then you can see here we have a little bit of fancy styles here. So what this is, I believe it is a font size of 14, and it's a text transform of uppercase and a letter spacing of 1 pixel. So to knock all that out, we have a font size of 14, a text transform of uppercase, and it's also got a letter spacing of 1 pixel. Now let's see what we get here. There we go. That's pretty much it. We do have, we do have some more spacing here, so I'm going to add some margin top. So let's do 20 pixels, and I'm going to move this up a little. I'm going to cut it from here and put it there. All right. Wow, this took longer than I thought. Like I said, we're almost 8:30. So let's see, we got that. We got the submit button. So as you can see, we added the required fields here. So it's going to say if we don't have anything filled out, it's going to yell at us. Now, same thing for the email. So if we put in this, and we have a valid email, our form is green all the way down because we got stuff going on. We hit submit, and it's actually refreshing because it's actually posting to this page. So if I look at it, well, you're not actually going to see it. But if you post it to a PHP page or whatever, you'd see all that data now. I think I was going to try to do a select and everything, but with the time, I don't know if I'll be able to like successfully and concisely do it. So I'm not going to worry about that. So at this moment, I'd like to take any questions. If I went too fast anywhere, you want me to go back over something, let me know now and I'll go over that.